Imagine this. You're standing in a hidden monastery, high in the mountains of Ethiopia. The year is 1773. Dust floats through shafts of golden light as a European explorer opens a wooden chest that hasn't been touched in centuries. Inside, wrapped in decaying cloth, lies a manuscript. As he carefully unfolds it, his hands begin to tremble. He's just discovered a book that was supposed to be lost forever. This is the Book of Jubilees. And for over 1,000 years, the world had no idea it existed. Most people know the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, the Ten Commandments. But what they don't know is that there was another book, a text given to Moses on that same mountain, alongside the laws carved in stone. This book didn't just tell what happened, it revealed why it happened. It contained a divine calendar, secrets about fallen angels, prophecies about the end of time, and then, suddenly, it vanished. In the 4th century, religious councils made a decision. Certain books would be included in scripture, others would be removed. The Book of Jubilees was among those cast out, banned, hidden, nearly destroyed. Why? Because it challenged authority. It contained knowledge that was deemed too dangerous for ordinary believers. It spoke of angels who rebelled, of giants who walked the earth, of a cosmic battle between light and darkness. For over 1,500 years, it existed only as fragments, whispers, forbidden references in other ancient texts. Then came that chest in Ethiopia, and suddenly, the world had access again to what had been deliberately erased. Scholars were stunned. Archaeologists couldn't believe it. The Dead Sea Scrolls later confirmed it. This wasn't a myth. This was real. This was ancient. This was dangerous. Tonight, we're going to explore what's inside. The creation story you've never heard. The angels who fell in love with humans. The secrets of time itself. The prophecies that were hidden for centuries. This is the story they didn't want you to know. This is the Book of Jubilees. Are you ready to discover what was forbidden? Let's begin. Chapter 2. Before the beginning, when angels walked among stars. Before there was earth, before there was sky, before the first sunrise painted the first morning, there was only God. Try to imagine that for a moment. No sound, no light, no darkness either, because darkness only exists where light has been. Just God, pure existence, pure love, pure power waiting to create. And in that timeless moment, God was not alone. The angels existed, beings of pure light, pure thought, pure devotion. They had no bodies like ours. They didn't eat or sleep or age. They were God's first children, created to serve, to worship, and to watch over the great work that was about to begin. The Book of Jubilees tells us something fascinating here, something most people never learn. These angels weren't just messengers. They were given jobs, assignments. One group of angels was put in charge of time itself, making sure that days followed nights, that seasons changed in order, that the universe kept its rhythm. Another group watched over nature, the winds, the rains, the growing of plants. Still others were assigned to protect humanity, once humans would be created. Among these angels, there were leaders, powerful beings with names that echoed through eternity. Michael, who would become the commander of heaven's armies. Gabriel, who would deliver the most important messages. Raphael, the healer. Uriel, the keeper of wisdom. But there was another group too. Angels who were given the most dangerous assignment of all, to watch over the earth, and guide humanity without interfering too much with human free will. These were called the Watchers. We'll come back to them later. Their story is both beautiful and tragic. For now, let's return to that moment before creation. God looked out into the nothing, into the not yet, and decided to make something wonderful, something that would reflect his love, something that would have the freedom to love him back. And so, God spoke. According to the Book of Jubilees, that first word contained everything. All the laws of physics, all the patterns of nature, all the cycles of time. It was like a seed that contained an entire forest waiting to unfold. The angels watched in awe as the universe exploded into existence. Light burst forth, not from the sun, because the sun didn't exist yet, but from God himself. Pure creative light that pushed back the nothing and said, "Here there will be something. Here there will be beauty. Here there will be life." And the angels sang. Can you imagine that song? Voices that had never been heard before, singing the first song that was ever sung. The Book of Jubilees says their music became part of the fabric of creation itself. That even now, if you listen carefully in the quietest moments, you can hear echoes of that first celestial chorus woven into the wind, into the waves, into the silence between heartbeats. On the first day, God separated light from darkness. He didn't destroy the darkness. He gave it a purpose, a time for rest, a time for sleep, a time for dreams. Darkness wasn't an enemy, it was a gift. Just like now, as you rest in the dark, you're participating in that ancient rhythm God established on the very first day of creation. If you're enjoying this journey so far, do me a favor and press the like button. It helps other people find these stories, and it lets me know you want more content like this. Your support means everything. On the second day, God created the sky. He separated the waters above from the waters below, creating a space, a room where life could breathe. The angels marveled at this. They didn't need air, but they understood God was preparing for something special, something that would be more fragile than them, more limited than them, but somehow more precious. On the third day, dry land appeared. Mountains rose from the seas, valleys formed, and then, at God's command, the earth began to create. Grass pushed up through soil, trees stretched toward the new sky, flowers bloomed in colors the angels had never imagined, and every plant carried within it the seeds of future forests, future gardens, future harvests. God was thinking ahead. He was planning for life that would need food, beauty, shade, and oxygen. The fourth day brought the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now the light had a source that creatures would be able to see and understand. The sun would mark the days. The moon would mark the months. The stars would mark the seasons and give travelers direction. But according to the Book of Jubilees, these heavenly lights had another purpose too. They were signs of God's covenant with creation. As long as the sun rose and the moon shone, humanity would know that God keeps his promises. Take another deep breath. Feel how your body naturally follows rhythms, breathing in, breathing out, your heart beating steadily. These rhythms were designed on these first days of creation. You are part of that original plan. On the fifth day, the waters exploded with life. Fish of every size and color, creatures that crawled on the ocean floor, and creatures that danced in the waves. Birds took to the sky, another marvel for the angels to witness. living things that could move, that could choose where to go, that could sing their own songs in response to the first song of creation. And then came the sixth day. This was the day everything changed. This was the day God created something that even the angels didn't fully understand. God reached down into the dust of the earth, the same earth he'd formed just days before, and he shaped it, carefully, lovingly, into a form that looked a little like the angels, but made of flesh and bone and blood, made to be temporary, fragile, dependent on food and water and air. The angels watched, confused. Why would God create something so weak, so limited? And then God did something he had never done before. He breathed his own breath into the dust, and the dust became alive. Not just alive like the fish and the birds, but alive in a new way, aware, conscious, able to think and dream and wonder and choose. This was Adam, the first human, made from earth but carrying within him the very breath of God. The Book of Jubilees says the angels fell silent in that moment. They understood suddenly that they were witnessing something holy, something that couldn't be explained by power or by wisdom. God had put a piece of himself into this fragile creature, and that meant this human, this Adam, was both terribly weak and incredibly precious at the same time. God placed Adam in a garden, a perfect place called Eden, where every tree was beautiful, every fruit was delicious, every moment was peace. And then God created Eve, a companion for Adam, so he wouldn't be alone, so they could love each other the way God loved them. And on the seventh day, God rested. Not because he was tired, God doesn't get tired, but because he wanted to establish a pattern. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, a rhythm for all of creation to follow. A reminder that life isn't just about productivity and achievement. It's also about stopping, breathing, remembering who made you and why. The angels were assigned their permanent posts. Most of them rejoiced in their roles. They saw humanity as God's beloved children, and they were honored to serve and protect them. But some angels looked at humans differently. They saw how God loved these weak creatures more than he seemed to love them. The powerful ones, the immortal ones. They saw how God gave humans something the angels didn't have, the freedom to truly choose, to truly love, because humans could also choose to reject God. And in some of those angels, something dark began to grow. Jealousy, pride, a desire to be worshipped themselves. These angels began to wonder, what if we didn't just watch humans? What if we influenced them, taught them, or even became like them? This thought, this temptation, would lead to one of the greatest catastrophes in the history of creation. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, in these early days, everything was perfect. Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the evening. The angels sang their songs of praise. The earth produced abundantly, and time began its eternal march forward, measured by the rising and setting of the sun, guided by the angels God had assigned to watch over it. What happened next would test everything, would test love, obedience, and the very nature of free will. Coming up, we'll witness the first choice, the moment when humanity decided to reach for something that wasn't meant for them yet. The moment that changed everything forever. Chapter 3. The 7 Days, Creation's Hidden Symphony. Let's slow down for a moment and look more closely at these 7 days of creation, because the Book of Jubilees reveals something most people miss. Every day of creation wasn't random. Each day was a note in a carefully composed symphony. Each element was placed exactly where it needed to be, at exactly the right time, for exactly the right reason. Think about it. God could have created everything in an instant. He's all-powerful. Why take 7 days? The answer is beautiful. God was teaching humanity how to build something meaningful, one step at a time, with rest built into the process. Let's walk through each day again, but this time, let's notice the pattern, the rhythm, the genius of the design. Day 1. Light. Not just physical light, but the concept of light itself. The idea that things can be revealed, understood, made clear. Before you can build anything, you need to be able to see it. So God starts with vision, with clarity, with the ability to distinguish between light and darkness, truth and confusion. Day 2. Space. God creates the sky, a vast open area between the waters above and the waters below. This is about boundaries, about creating room for things to exist without crushing each other. It's about balance. Just like in your own life, you need space. Space to breathe, space to think, space to be yourself without being overwhelmed by everything around you. Day 3. Foundation and life. Dry land appears, something solid to stand on, and immediately that land begins producing plants. This is God saying, once you have solid ground beneath you, once you have a foundation, growth happens naturally. You don't have to force it, you just have to create the right conditions, and life emerges on its own. Are you still comfortable? Adjust your position if you need to. There's no rush. We have all night. Day 4. Direction and time. The sun, moon, and stars appear. These aren't just pretty lights in the sky. They're tools for navigation and measurement. They help you know where you are and what time it is. In your spiritual journey, you need the same things. Markers that help you stay oriented. Principles that help you measure your progress. God built those reference points right into the heavens, so we'd never lose our way completely. Day 5. Movement and song. Fish and birds. Creatures that don't just exist, but move. That explore. That communicate. God is building towards something. He's adding complexity. First there was light, then space, then solid ground, then markers in the sky. Now there's movement, there's exploration, there's the beginning of relationship as creatures call out to each other. Day 6. Complexity and reflection. Land animals first, creatures with increasing intelligence, increasing social bonds. And then, at the very end of the 6th day, humans. Why save humans for last? Because we need everything that came before. We need light to see, space to breathe, ground to stand on, time to measure our lives, movement to explore, and the whole ecosystem to support us. We're not the beginning of creation. We're the culmination, the point where everything comes together. And here's what the Book of Jubilees emphasizes. Humans weren't just made to consume what God created. We were made to care for it, to name it, to understand it, to be stewards, responsible caretakers of this magnificent gift. Day 7. Rest and reflection. God stops creating and simply enjoys what He's made. He invites us to do the same, to stop producing and simply be, to look at our lives and say, "This is good. I am grateful." Do you see the pattern now? Each day builds on the previous day. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is random. And the whole thing culminates not in more work, but in rest. This is the divine rhythm. Creation and rest. Action and reflection. Doing and being. The Book of Jubilees tells us that the angels who were assigned to watch over time understood this rhythm perfectly. They knew that time wasn't just one thing happening after another. Time was a sacred cycle, a pattern that repeated, and built into that pattern were opportunities for renewal. Every 7 days, a Sabbath, a day of rest. Every 7 years, a Sabbath year, a time to let the land recover. And every 7 times 7 years, 49 years, a jubilee, a complete cycle, a time when debts were forgiven, slaves were freed, and the whole community started fresh. This is what makes the Book of Jubilees so special. It doesn't just tell you what happened, it shows you the math of heaven, the divine calculation that governs everything from the spin of electrons to the rise and fall of empires. You are living inside this pattern right now. Your heartbeat follows a rhythm. Your breath follows a cycle. Your life moves through seasons. And all of it echoes back to these first 7 days when God established how reality would work. Take a moment to feel that rhythm inside you, the steady beat of your heart, the gentle rise and fall of your breath. This is the music of creation playing inside your own body. You are a walking, breathing proof that God's design is still working exactly as He intended. The angels saw all of this, and most of them bowed in worship. They understood that they were witnessing something infinitely wise, something beyond their own comprehension. But a few angels, a few began to wonder if they could improve on God's design, if they could add their own notes to the symphony, if they could be creators too, not just servants. This dangerous thought would lead to the first great rebellion, and its consequences would echo through every generation of humanity. Before we get to that tragic story, let me ask you something. Are you enjoying this journey through ancient wisdom? If this content is helping you relax, learn, or think differently about faith and history, please hit the like button and leave a comment. Tell me what surprises you most about these forgotten stories. Your engagement helps this channel grow and bring these ancient texts to more people who are searching for deeper truth. Now, let's return to the garden, to paradise, to the moment when everything was perfect, and 2 humans stood at the center of creation with one simple rule to follow. One tree they couldn't eat from, one boundary they couldn't cross, one test of whether love freely given would be stronger than temptation. Chapter 4. Paradise Lost. The first choice that changed everything. Imagine Eden with me for a moment. Perfect temperature, gentle breeze, the sound of a river flowing softly through the garden. Every fruit tree within reach, heavy with the sweetest fruit you can imagine. No fear of predators, no need to lock doors, no jealousy or competition or confusion. Adam and Eve walked through this paradise completely at peace. They talked with God face to face every evening when the day cooled down. Think about that. Not praying into empty air, hoping someone hears. Actually walking beside God, asking questions, hearing His voice as clearly as you hear your best friend. They had work to do, tending the garden, naming the animals, but it wasn't stressful work. It was creative, fulfilling work. The kind of work that makes you feel more alive, not less. They were naked and felt no shame. Not because there was anything wrong with having bodies, but because they saw each other and themselves the way God saw them, as beautiful, beloved, worthy. There was only one rule in this entire paradise. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Just one rule. Out of thousands of trees, just one was off limits. Now, you might be wondering, why put that tree there at all? If God didn't want them to eat from it, why not just not include it? This is where the Book of Jubilees gives us insight that Genesis only hints at. God wasn't testing them to see if they would fail. He was honoring them with a real choice. Because love without choice isn't love, it's programming. Think about it in your own life. If someone is nice to you only because they have no other option, does that mean anything? But if someone chooses to love you when they could easily walk away, that love is precious. That love is real. God wanted real love from humanity, which meant humanity needed the ability to choose something else. The tree wasn't a trap, it was a gift, the gift of meaningful choice. For a time, we don't know how long, Adam and Eve made the right choice every day. They walked past that tree. They enjoyed all the other trees. They lived in perfect relationship with God, with each other, and with all of creation. But there was someone watching them who didn't want this to continue. The Book of Jubilees calls him by different names: the serpent, the deceiver, Satan. But before he became the enemy of humanity, he was one of the most beautiful angels in heaven. His name was Lucifer, which means light bearer, and he had been the angel of worship, leading all of heaven in praising God. But pride corrupted him. He began to think he deserved the worship instead of God. And when God created humans and loved them so deeply, Lucifer's pride turned into rage. He couldn't hurt God directly, so he decided to hurt what God loved most: humanity. One day, as Eve walked near the forbidden tree, the serpent spoke to her. Now, the Bible tells us this much, but the Book of Jubilees adds an important detail. Eve wasn't afraid of the serpent because death didn't exist yet. Nothing had ever died. She had no concept of danger or deception. Her innocence was complete. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree in the garden? The serpent asked. Notice the strategy there. He didn't start with a direct lie. He started by making Eve question what God had said, by planting doubt about whether she'd heard correctly. No, Eve replied. We can eat from every tree except the one in the middle. God said if we eat from that tree, we'll die. You won't die, the serpent said smoothly. God knows that when you eat from it, you'll become like him, knowing good and evil. He's keeping something good from you. This is the core of every temptation, isn't it? The suggestion that God is holding out on you, that he's keeping something good from you, that you'd be better off if you stopped trusting him and took matters into your own hands. Eve looked at the tree, really looked at it for the first time, and suddenly it didn't look forbidden. It looked appealing, desirable. The fruit seemed to glow with the promise of wisdom, of power, of becoming more than she was. She reached out, took the fruit, ate it. The Book of Jubilees tells us that in that moment, something broke in the fabric of creation. Not with a sound, not with drama. But the angels watching felt it, a tear, a separation. The harmony that had existed between heaven and earth suddenly went out of tune. Eve didn't die immediately. The serpent was right about that, but he was also lying, because something did die in that moment. The innocence died, the perfect trust died, the uncomplicated relationship with God died. Eve took the fruit to Adam. He looked at it, looked at her, and here's something most people miss. Adam wasn't deceived the way Eve was. The Bible tells us that explicitly. He knew this was wrong, but he chose to eat anyway because he couldn't bear to be separated from Eve. In a twisted way, it was an act of love. But it was love that chose a human relationship over obedience to God. And that choice had consequences neither of them could have imagined. Suddenly, they felt exposed, ashamed. They looked down at their bodies, the same bodies they'd had moments before, and for the first time, they felt like something was wrong. They heard God walking in the garden, as he did every evening. But instead of running to meet him with joy, they hid. Can you imagine how that must have felt to God? Your beloved children, whom you've given everything to, hiding from you in fear. "Where are you?" God called out. Not because he didn't know, but because he wanted them to face what they'd done, to choose honesty over hiding. Adam answered, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." "Who told you that you were naked?" God asked. "Have you eaten from the tree I commanded you not to eat from?" And here's where it gets even worse. Instead of owning up to his choice, Adam blamed Eve. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit." Eve, in turn, blamed the serpent. "The serpent deceived me." The first sin led immediately to the second sin, refusing to take responsibility, blaming someone else, breaking the bonds of trust and community. If you're still with me, I hope you're feeling relaxed and thoughtful. These aren't just ancient stories, they're mirrors showing us our own hearts. We'll come back to what all this means for us in a little while. But first, we need to hear what happened next. God didn't destroy them. He didn't kill them on the spot, though he would have been justified. Instead, he did something remarkable. He made them clothes from animal skins. Think about what that means. An animal had to die to cover their shame. This was the first death in creation, the first blood spilled. And it was spilled to protect humanity from the consequences of their own choice. The Book of Jubilees says the angels wept when they saw this. They understood something humans wouldn't fully grasp for thousands of years, that God himself would one day provide another covering, another sacrifice, his own son, dying to cover not just the shame of Adam and Eve, but the sins of every human who would ever live. But that's still far in the future of our story. For now, God did what love sometimes has to do. He set boundaries. There would be consequences, pain in childbirth, difficulty in work, eventual death, not as punishment for its own sake, but as natural results of stepping outside the design, of choosing independence from God. And then God sent them out of Eden, not because he stopped loving them, but because there was another tree in that garden, the tree of life. And if they ate from that tree in their fallen state, they would live forever in brokenness, never able to be healed. So God posted angels with flaming swords at the entrance to Eden. The way back was closed, but the Book of Jubilees reveals something most people miss. God didn't close the way back out of cruelty. He closed it because he was already planning a different way forward, a way that would involve redemption, restoration, and a return to paradise, not through human effort, but through divine grace. Adam and Eve left the garden hand in hand, walking into a world that was suddenly much harder, much scarier, and much more uncertain. Behind them, the garden remained perfect, untouched, waiting. Ahead of them lay the long, painful, beautiful story of humanity learning to find its way back to God. And watching them go, the angels wondered, will these humans ever find their way back? Or is this the end of God's great dream for them? The answer would unfold over thousands of years, through floods and covenants, through prophets and promises, through failures and fresh starts. And through it all, one truth would remain. God never stopped loving the creatures he had breathed his own life into. Coming up next, we'll see what happened when angels themselves fell. When the Watchers who were supposed to protect humanity decided to join them instead. And when that choice created something so terrible that God himself would have to cleanse the earth with water. Chapter 5. The Watchers. When heaven's guardians fell. Now we come to one of the most controversial parts of the Book of Jubilees. A story so strange, so disturbing, that many religious leaders throughout history have tried to downplay it or explain it away. But it's right there in the ancient texts, in Jubilees, in the Book of Enoch, and even hinted at in Genesis chapter 6. After Adam and Eve left Eden, humanity began to multiply. Their children had children. Generations spread across the earth. Some people remained faithful to God, trying to live righteously despite being outside paradise. Others forgot God entirely and made up their own rules. The angels God had assigned to watch over humanity, the Watchers, saw all of this. They saw humans struggling. They saw us trying to survive in a world that was now hostile. They saw us experiencing pain, loss, aging, and death. And some of these angels began to feel something they'd never felt before: desire. The Book of Jubilees describes how certain Watchers looked at human women and found them beautiful. This wasn't the pure appreciation of art that angels normally experienced. This was something darker, more possessive. It was envy of human experience, a desire to have what they were only meant to observe. Their leader was an angel named Semjaza. He gathered 200 Watchers and proposed something that had never been done before. Let's go down to earth. Let's take human form. Let's marry these women and have children with them. The other Watchers hesitated. They knew this was forbidden. Angels and humans weren't meant to mix. The boundaries between heaven and earth were there for a reason. But Semjaza argued, if I'm the only one who does this, I'll bear all the guilt alone. But if we all do it together, we share the responsibility, and who can punish all of us? It's chilling, isn't it? The logic of group sin. The idea that if enough people do something wrong, it somehow becomes acceptable. And so, they swore an oath together. All 200 of them. They would descend to earth, take human form, and marry human women. And if God punished them for it, they would face that punishment together. According to Jubilees, this happened in the days of Jared, one of Adam's descendants. The name Jared actually means descent, perhaps because this was when the angels descended from heaven. These fallen Watchers didn't just blend in quietly. They revealed secrets that humans weren't ready for. They taught men how to make weapons of war. They taught women how to use cosmetics and jewelry for seduction. They taught humanity astrology, sorcery, the cutting of roots for potions, knowledge that could be used for good or evil, but which humans in their fallen state would mostly use for evil, and their wives became pregnant. Now, this is where the story becomes truly strange. The children born from these unions were not normal humans. They were called the Nephilim, The giants. These weren't just tall people. According to the Book of Jubilees, they were enormous, strong, and violent. They had the power of angels combined with the physical form of humans, but they had none of the wisdom or self-control that might have tempered that power. At first, humans were amazed by them. They seemed like heroes, mighty men, demigods. And perhaps for a little while, some of them did heroic things. But power without morality is dangerous. And these giants had immense power with very little morality. They began to consume everything around them. All the food humans had stored. All the animals humans had domesticated. And when those ran out, the Book of Jubilees tells us they turned on humanity itself. They became predators, monsters. They treated humans the way humans had been treating animals, as resources to be consumed. Terror spread across the earth. Humanity had no defense against these creatures. How do you fight something that combines supernatural strength with physical form? How do you reason with beings who see you as nothing more than food? Violence filled the earth. Not just the violence of the giants, but human violence too. Because once the boundaries of heaven and earth were broken, once the natural order was disrupted, everything fell apart. Humans began killing each other, forming wicked alliances, creating systems of oppression and exploitation that grew worse with each generation. God looked down at what his beautiful creation had become, and his heart was grieved. The Book of Jubilees tells us that God held a council in heaven. He summoned the archangels, the angels who had remained faithful, and showed them what was happening on earth. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel stood before God and witnessed the chaos. They saw the giants terrorizing humanity. They saw the Watchers teaching forbidden knowledge. They saw the earth itself groaning under the weight of wickedness. And God said, "This cannot continue. The Watchers who fell must be bound. The giants must be destroyed, and the earth itself must be cleansed." But before that judgment came, there was one family, one small family, who still remembered God, who still tried to live righteously despite the evil all around them. A man named Noah. Take a deep breath. I know these stories are heavy. They're meant to be. They're showing us the serious consequences of breaking divine boundaries, of pride, of choosing power over wisdom. But they're also showing us something else, that even when the world falls into complete chaos, God is still watching, still caring, still looking for those who will remain faithful. Noah was born into a world gone mad, a world where giants ruled, where violence was normal, where the knowledge of God was fading from human memory. But his father, Lamech, and his grandfather, Methuselah, had passed down the stories, the memory of Eden, the promise that God still loved humanity despite our fall, the hope that somehow, someday, things would be set right. Noah held on to that hope, and when everyone around him was descending deeper into sin, Noah chose differently. The Book of Jubilees says that Noah was perfect in his generations, not sinless, but complete, whole, trying with all his heart to do what was right. And God noticed. When God decided to cleanse the earth, he didn't destroy everyone and start over from scratch. He saved Noah and his family. Because even in judgment, God preserves mercy. Even in destruction, God protects those who cling to him. But before we get to the flood, we need to understand what happened to those fallen watchers. God sent the archangels with specific missions. Raphael was commanded to bind the leader, Semjaza, and cast him into darkness. Michael was told to bind the other watchers and throw them into the abyss, a place of darkness and torment where they would remain until the day of final judgment. These angels, who had wanted to experience physical pleasure, who had wanted to be worshipped like gods, found themselves trapped in darkness, cut off from the light of heaven they had once taken for granted. Gabriel was given perhaps the most tragic mission: to turn the giants against each other, to whisper confusion into their minds until they began fighting among themselves. And so the very creatures who had terrorized humanity became their own destroyers, tearing each other apart in violence until their blood soaked the earth. And Uriel was sent to warn Noah: a flood is coming. Build an ark. Prepare to survive what no other human will survive. This is the part of the story where some people ask difficult questions. Why did God destroy the earth? Why kill everyone except one family? Doesn't that seem harsh? The Book of Jubilees addresses this directly. It explains that the earth had become so corrupted, not just morally, but physically, that there was no fixing it without starting over. The mixing of angelic and human DNA had created something unnatural. The violence had become so pervasive that children were being born into a world where cruelty was the only thing they knew. God's judgment wasn't cruelty, it was surgery, cutting out the cancer before it killed everything. But even in that judgment, God made a way for humanity to continue. Through Noah. Through one righteous family who would become the parents of a new world. If you're finding these ancient stories fascinating, please consider sharing this video with someone who loves deep dives into scripture and ancient texts. And drop a comment telling me, did you know about the Watchers before tonight? What do you think about angels choosing to fall? Your thoughts matter, and I read every comment. Now, let's go to the ark. Let's stand with Noah as he builds something impossible, trusting a promise that seems crazy, while the whole world mocks him and the rain begins to fall. Chapter 6: The Giants and the Flood, Judgment and Mercy. Noah stood in his workshop, holding a piece of timber, looking at the plans God had given him. An ark, a massive boat designed to float, not sail. 300 cubits long, about 450 feet. 50 cubits wide, 3 decks high, with a door in the side and a window near the top. It made no logical sense. They were nowhere near an ocean. It had never rained, not like what God was describing. Water falling from the sky in quantities large enough to flood the entire earth. Impossible. But Noah had learned something his contemporaries had forgotten. When God speaks, you obey even when it makes no sense. The Book of Jubilees tells us that Noah's grandfather, Methuselah, had lived for centuries, long enough to pass down the stories of Eden, of God's direct relationship with the first humans, long enough to remember when righteousness was the norm instead of the exception. Before Methuselah died, he blessed Noah and said, "The world will be cleansed, but you will be saved. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and he will guide you through the waters." So Noah began to build. Every morning, he and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, would work on the ark, cutting timber, sealing seams with pitch, building the internal structure that would hold thousands of animals. And every morning, people would gather to mock them. Noah's building a boat in the desert, because he thinks it's going to rain. Have you ever heard anything so stupid? They didn't just mock. They threatened. They vandalized the work. They tried to turn Noah's own family against him. "Your father is crazy," they told his sons. "You're wasting your lives building this monument to delusion." But Noah kept building. The Book of Jubilees tells us this went on for years, decades even. Can you imagine? Day after day of mockery. Day after day of looking at the cloudless sky and wondering if you'd heard God correctly. Day after day of doubt creeping in. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm leading my family into humiliation? But Noah had something his mockers didn't have. He had faith. Not blind faith. Faith built on the memory of God's faithfulness passed down through generations. Faith built on the knowledge that God doesn't lie. That when he makes a promise or gives a warning, he keeps his word. And then one day, something strange started happening. Animals began arriving. Not just nearby animals. Animals from all over the earth. They came in pairs. One male, one female. Walking calmly toward the ark, as if summoned by an invisible force. The mockers fell silent. This wasn't normal. Birds flew to the ark and landed on its roof, waiting. Insects swarmed toward it. Lions walked beside lambs, natural enemies in a temporary truce. Elephants and mice, eagles and snakes, all of them drawn by something beyond human understanding. God had called them, and they obeyed. Noah opened the door of the ark, and they entered. Onto the first deck, the second deck, the third deck, into stalls that Noah had built without knowing what would need them. Everything fit. Everything had its place. When the last animal was aboard, God spoke to Noah. "Come into the ark, you and your whole family. 7 days from now, I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and his sons' wives entered the ark. 8 people. Out of the millions living on earth, only 8 would survive what was coming. And then God himself closed the door. The people outside laughed nervously. Any minute now, Noah would come out, embarrassed. This whole thing would be revealed as a massive miscalculation. But Noah didn't come out. And 7 days later, the sky changed. The Book of Jubilees describes it as the fountains of the great deep bursting open and the windows of heaven opening. Water came from below and above simultaneously. Not a rainstorm, a cataclysm. The entire water cycle of the earth disrupted at once. Within hours, people stopped laughing. Within days, they were climbing to higher ground. Within weeks, there was no higher ground left. They pounded on the ark's door. "Noah, Noah, we're sorry. We believe you now. Let us in." But the door had been sealed by God himself. Noah couldn't have opened it if he wanted to. Inside the ark, Noah and his family heard the screams, heard the pounding, heard the water rising, rising, rising. Can you imagine how that must have felt? To be safe while hearing the world die around you. To know you were right, but to take no joy in being right, because it meant everyone you'd ever known was drowning. The Book of Jubilees tells us that Noah wept as the waters rose. He prayed, "Lord, I know your judgment is righteous, but my heart breaks for those who wouldn't listen." And God said to him, "I gave them 120 years to turn from their wickedness. I sent you to warn them. They had every chance, but they chose violence and rebellion. What is happening now is what they chose." The rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights, but the flooding continued much longer than that. The fountains of the deep kept pouring water onto the surface. The entire landscape of the earth was rearranged. Mountains that had existed since creation disappeared. New mountains formed. The world was remade by water. For 150 days, the waters covered everything. The ark floated, a tiny vessel carrying the future of all life on earth. And then, slowly, the waters began to recede. God sent a wind, the same word in Hebrew that means spirit or breath. Just as God's breath had once created Adam from dust, now God's breath dried the earth from water. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. But even then, Noah had to wait. Wait for the waters to recede enough. Wait for dry land to appear. Wait for God's signal that it was time to emerge into the new world. Noah sent out a raven first. It flew back and forth but didn't return. It had found something to perch on. Then Noah sent a dove. It came back because there was nowhere to land. He waited 7 days and sent the dove again. This time it returned with an olive branch in its beak. Life was returning to earth. Plants were growing again. 7 days later, Noah sent the dove a third time. It didn't return. It had found a home in the new world. And God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, all of you, every animal, and be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth again." Noah opened the door that had been sealed for over a year, and stepped out into a world washed clean. The first thing he did wasn't to plant a garden or build a house. The first thing Noah did was build an altar and offer a sacrifice to God. A thank you. An acknowledgement that their survival wasn't their own doing. It was grace. Pure, undeserved grace. And the Book of Jubilees tells us that when God smelled that sacrifice, when he saw Noah's gratitude, his humility, his continued faithfulness even after everything he'd been through, God made a promise. Never again will I destroy the earth with water. Never again will I cut off all life. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. And as a sign of that promise, God created something that had never existed before. A rainbow. Light passing through water droplets, creating a spectrum of colors that arched across the sky. "Whenever I see the rainbow in the clouds," God said, "I will remember my covenant with you and with all living creatures." The waters will never again become a flood to destroy all life. Noah looked up at that rainbow, the first rainbow in human history, and understood something profound. Judgment had passed, mercy had triumphed, and a new chapter was beginning. The giants were gone. The watchers were bound in darkness. The corruption that had nearly destroyed creation had been washed away. But humanity still carried the same weakness, the same capacity for sin. The flood had cleansed the earth, but it hadn't changed the human heart. That would require something else, something still to come. A different kind of sacrifice, a different kind of salvation. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. There was hope. There was a family standing on a mountain looking out at a new world, ready to begin again. Coming up next, we'll follow the generations from Noah to Abraham. We'll see how humanity spreads across the earth, how languages multiply at Babel, and how God chooses one man, one family, to be the beginning of his plan to bring blessing to all nations. Chapter 7. Noah's Ark. Faith in the face of mockery. Let's pause here for a moment and really think about what Noah's experience must have been like. Because it's easy to hear the story and miss the human drama, the emotional weight, the sheer difficulty of what he went through. You've probably never built a boat, but you've probably had moments when God asked you to do something that didn't make sense, something that other people didn't understand, something that made you look foolish or strange. Maybe it was forgiving someone who didn't deserve it. Maybe it was leaving a successful career to pursue a calling. Maybe it was standing up for what's right when everyone around you was choosing what's easy. Whatever it was, you probably felt a little bit of what Noah felt. The loneliness of obedience when you're the only one obeying. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes this part of Noah's story because it's so important. Noah wasn't a superhero. He was a regular man who chose to trust God even when everything in his circumstances said God was wrong. Think about the practical challenges alone. Where do you get enough wood to build something that massive? How do you figure out the engineering without modern tools or knowledge? How do you keep working when your back aches, when your hands blister, when you're exhausted and discouraged? And the emotional challenges were even worse. Every day, he faced ridicule. People he'd known his whole life turned against him. Can you imagine going into town to buy supplies and having strangers point and laugh? Having former friends cross the street to avoid you because they don't want to be associated with crazy Noah? His sons could have left. His wife could have said, "I've supported you long enough. This has gone too far." His extended family could have disowned him, but they didn't. They stayed. They believed. They worked alongside him, even when they must have had their own doubts. And here's what the Book of Jubilees points out. Their faith wasn't rewarded quickly. It wasn't like Noah heard from God, and then the rain immediately came. Years passed, maybe decades, long enough for Noah's hair to grey. Long enough for a whole generation to grow up knowing him as that strange old man building a boat for no reason. But Noah kept building, because he understood something crucial. God's timing isn't our timing. A delay doesn't mean God changed his mind. It might mean God is being patient, giving more people more time to turn from their wickedness. It might mean God is building your faith while he's building his plan. It might mean there are other pieces that need to fall into place before the promise can be fulfilled. Noah kept building because he had learned to trust God's character more than his own understanding. And when the animals came, Noah finally had confirmation in a way no one could deny. This wasn't madness. This wasn't coincidence. This was God. Can you picture it? The sky darkening with birds, the ground trembling with the approach of large animals, the sound of thousands of creatures all moving in the same direction, answering a call only they could hear. The mockers fell silent. Some of them started to wonder, what if Noah was right? What if judgment really is coming? But even then, most of them didn't change. They watched the spectacle. They felt the first drops of rain, and still they didn't believe. Not until it was too late. Not until the water was rising and the door was sealed and there was nothing left but regret. This is one of the saddest parts of the story. God didn't want to destroy those people. He'd given them every warning, every chance. 120 years of watching Noah build. 120 years of hearing about God's judgment. 120 years to change their minds and their ways. But pride is a powerful thing. So is the comfort of going along with what everyone else is doing. so is the fear of admitting you've been wrong. And so they drowned in a flood they'd been warned about for over a century. Inside the ark, Noah's family lived in a strange new reality, surrounded by animals, rocked by waves, listening to the rain pound on the roof day after day. No sunlight, no fresh air, no solid ground. The Book of Jubilees says this was a time of deep reflection for them. They had nothing to do but care for the animals, pray, and think about what had happened, about how close they'd come to ignoring God like everyone else, about how their salvation was purely God's grace, not their own righteousness. They celebrated the Sabbath there in the ark, just as God had commanded from the beginning. Even in the middle of global destruction, they rested on the seventh day. They maintained the rhythm God had established at creation. This is important. Even in crisis, even in chaos, some things don't change. The rhythms God set in place at the beginning, work and rest, giving and receiving, trust and obedience, those remain. And when the door finally opened and they stepped out onto the new earth, they weren't just survivors, they were witnesses, living testimonies to the truth that faith in God, even when it looks foolish, is never misplaced. The rainbow God gave them wasn't just pretty. It was a physical reminder of a spiritual truth, that God keeps His promises, that His mercy is greater than His wrath, that He will always preserve a remnant, always provide a way forward, always remember His covenant, even when we forget it. Every time you see a rainbow now, you're looking at God's promise to Noah, a promise made thousands of years ago that still stands today. The waters will never again destroy all life. The seasons will continue. The earth will endure. And just as God kept that promise to Noah, He will keep every promise He's made to you. If you're struggling with something difficult right now, if you're in your own ark, waiting for the storm to pass, remember Noah. Remember that obedience is never wasted, even when you can't see the results yet. Remember that God's timing is perfect, even when it feels slow. Remember that the door will open, the rain will stop, new life will begin again. You just have to keep building, keep trusting, keep taking the next step of faith, even when you can't see the whole staircase. Coming up, we'll watch humanity spread out from that ark across the whole earth. We'll see how different nations formed, how languages began, and how God chose one man from one city to become the father of faith for all people who would ever believe in Him. Chapter 8. Abraham's journey from idols to covenant. Now we jump forward in our story. Generations have passed since Noah. The earth has been repopulated, cities have been built, and unfortunately, humanity has started to forget the lessons of the flood. This is the pattern you'll see throughout the Book of Jubilees. God rescues humanity. Humanity promises to be faithful, and then slowly, gradually, we drift away again. Not usually in one big dramatic rebellion, but in small compromises. Little decisions to trust ourselves more than God. Tiny steps away from what we know is right. After the flood, Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the fathers of all the nations. Their children spread across the earth, and their children's children built civilizations. But something troubling began to happen. As people settled in different areas and developed different cultures, they started creating different gods. They looked at the sun and said, "That must be divine. Let's worship it." They looked at the moon, at the stars, at the mountains, at the rivers, and they assigned divinity to all of them. They carved statues and said, "This represents the god of fertility," or "This represents the god of war." And before long, the one true God who had created everything was forgotten, or at least pushed to the margins, remembered only by a few faithful families. One of those families was in a city called Ur, in Mesopotamia. And in that family, a boy was born. His father named him Abram, which means exalted father. His father, Terah, was an idol maker. His job was literally to carve the false gods that people worshipped. The Book of Jubilees tells us that from a young age, Abram was different. He looked at his father's idols and asked questions that made people uncomfortable. "Father, you make these statues. They can't move. They can't speak. They don't eat the food people leave them. How can they be gods?" Terah would reply, "Don't question tradition, boy. This is how things are done." But Abram couldn't stop questioning. He looked at the world around him and knew there had to be one creator, one source for everything. The sun, the moon, the stars. They were created things, not creators. They followed patterns. They had a design. Something greater must have designed them. One night, according to Jubilees, Abram stood under the stars and prayed to a God he'd never met. "If you're real, if you're the one who made all of this, show me. Teach me. I want to worship you, not these stone and wood idols that can't hear or help." And God answered, not with thunder or a burning bush, not yet, but with a quiet voice in Abram's heart, a call, a direction, a purpose. "Leave this place. Leave your father's house. Leave everything familiar. Go to a land I will show you." Now this is important to understand. God didn't show Abram a map. He didn't give him an address. He said, "Go to a land I will show you." Future tense. Walk in faith, and I'll reveal it as you go. Abram was 75 years old when he heard this call, not a young man. Not someone at the beginning of his adventure. He was old enough to have a comfortable life, established relationships, and every reason to stay where he was. But he packed up everything he owned, took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, and left. He walked away from security into uncertainty because God had spoken. This is what made Abraham. God would later change his name from Abram to Abraham, the father of faith. Not perfection, not complete understanding, but willingness to obey even when it didn't make sense. The journey wasn't easy. There were famines, there were conflicts. There were moments when Abraham doubted whether he'd heard correctly. But through it all, God kept showing up, kept providing, kept reassuring him. And then God made a promise that seemed impossible. "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and through you, all nations on earth will be blessed." Abraham looked at his wife, who was old and had never been able to have children, and thought, "How exactly is this going to work?" But he believed. The Book of Jubilees says, this is when Abraham was counted as righteous, not because he was perfect, but because he trusted God's promise even when everything in his circumstances said it was impossible. Years passed. The promise didn't come. Abraham tried to help God along. He had a son, Ishmael, through his wife's servant. But God said, "No, this isn't the child I promised. Your wife Sarah will have a son." Abraham laughed. Sarah laughed. They were 90 and 99 years old respectively. Having a baby was biologically impossible at their age. But with God, nothing is impossible. And so Isaac was born, the son of promise, the miracle child, the proof that when God makes a promise, time and biology and probability don't matter. He will keep his word. This would be a beautiful place to end Abraham's story. But the most important part was still to come. When Isaac was a young man, God gave Abraham the hardest command he would ever receive. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice. Can you imagine? After waiting decades for this child, after seeing God's promise finally fulfilled, now God was asking Abraham to give him up, to kill him. How did that make any sense? But Abraham had learned something over his long journey of faith. God's ways are higher than our ways. God's plans are better than our plans. Even when we can't understand, we can trust. So Abraham took Isaac up the mountain, built an altar, raised the knife, and at the last possible second, God stopped him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. The Book of Jubilees tells us that angels wept when they saw this moment. They saw Abraham's willingness to give up what he loved most. They saw Isaac's trust in his father, and they understood that this was a picture, a preview of what God himself would one day do, give up his own son for the sake of humanity. Abraham's story teaches us that faith isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting the character of God even when his instructions don't make sense. It's about being willing to let go of what we love most, trusting that God loves us and wants what's best for us. And the promise God made to Abraham, that through him all nations would be blessed, that promise is still being fulfilled today, thousands of years later. Because from Abraham's family line would eventually come Jesus, the ultimate blessing to all nations. Take a moment to rest here. Let these stories wash over you. You don't have to memorize every detail. You don't have to understand everything. Just let the truth sink in. God is faithful. God keeps his promises. And he's looking for people who will trust him even when the path ahead is unclear. If you're enjoying this deep dive into ancient scripture, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Every subscriber helps this channel grow and bring these powerful, forgotten stories to more people who are searching for truth and peace. Now, we're going to jump forward again to the moment that connects all these stories together, when Moses climbed a mountain, met with God, and received not just laws, but the entire history you've been hearing tonight. Chapter 9. Moses and the Burning Truth, Mount Sinai's Secret. We've finally arrived at the moment we started with. Moses, standing on Mount Sinai, surrounded by fire and clouds, receiving the 10 Commandments. But the Book of Jubilees tells us he received much more than that. While he was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, an angel appeared to him. This angel wasn't just a messenger. He was the angel of the presence, one of the highest-ranking angels in heaven, tasked with recording the history of creation itself. This angel said to Moses, "What you are about to receive is not just law, it is context. It is the story behind the law. It is the reason these commandments matter, explained through the history of everything that has happened since the beginning." And then, the angel began to tell the story you've been hearing tonight. He told Moses about creation, about the 7 days and the sacred rhythm of time. He explained the Sabbath wasn't just a rule, it was built into the fabric of reality from the very beginning. He told Moses about Adam and Eve, about the choice in the garden, about how sin entered the world, not through ignorance, but through deliberate disobedience. He wanted Moses to understand the laws God was giving weren't arbitrary restrictions. They were guardrails to keep humanity from falling into the same trap again. He told Moses about the Watchers and the giants, about what happens when the boundaries between heaven and earth are violated. He wanted Moses to know there are spiritual forces at work that humans can't see. The battle isn't just physical, it's cosmic. He told Moses about Noah and the flood, about how God's judgment and mercy work together, how God will wait patiently, giving chance after chance, but eventually consequences come. And even in those consequences, God preserves a remnant. God always provides a way forward. He told Moses about Abraham and the covenant, about how God chooses unlikely people, old people, barren people, broken people, and works miracles through them when they trust Him. But here's what made the Book of Jubilees so controversial. The angel didn't just tell these stories as history. He explained the pattern behind them. He revealed to Moses that time itself is organized into jubilees, periods of 49 years, 7 times 7, the number of completion multiplied by itself, and that every major event in history happens according to this divine calendar. The angel showed Moses that creation wasn't random. The fall wasn't a surprise. The flood wasn't an overreaction. Abraham's call wasn't arbitrary. Everything was part of a carefully orchestrated plan that God had designed before the foundation of the world. And then the angel told Moses something that would eventually get this book banned. The future is already written. Not in a way that removes human free will, but in the sense that God already knows every choice that will be made and has prepared responses for all of them. The angel told Moses about the coming exile of Israel, about the sufferings they would endure, about the prophets who would call them back to God, and about the ultimate Redeemer who would come, not just to save Israel, but to save all of humanity. This Redeemer, the angel said, will be born from the line of Abraham, from the tribe of Judah, from the house of David. He will not come with armies or political power. He will come in humility. He will teach the truth of God. He will heal the sick. And he will offer himself as a sacrifice, the final sacrifice that all the lambs and goats and bulls could only symbolize. Moses fell on his face when he heard this. He understood he was hearing about something far greater than the liberation of Israel from Egypt. He was hearing about the liberation of all humanity from sin itself. But when will this happen? Moses asked. And the angel replied, not in your lifetime, not in your children's lifetime. Many generations will pass, many jubilees will turn, but the promise is certain. Just as the flood came exactly when God said it would, just as Isaac was born exactly when God said he would be, this Redeemer will come exactly when God has appointed. The angel then told Moses to write all of this down, every story, every date, every pattern, so that future generations would understand they weren't living in chaos. They were living in a story, God's story, and their role was to trust the author. But, the angel warned, not everyone will accept what you write. Some will say it's too specific, too detailed, too presumptuous to claim we know God's plans. Some will fear the power this knowledge gives to ordinary people, the power to see that God doesn't need priests or temples or institutions to connect with him, that he can speak directly to anyone who has ears to hear. Moses wrote it all down, He carved the 10 Commandments on stone tablets, but he also wrote the Book of Jubilees on scrolls. The stone was public for everyone to see and know. The scrolls were sacred for those who were ready to understand. When Moses came down from the mountain, his face was glowing. Not metaphorically, literally glowing, reflecting the glory of God he'd been in the presence of for 40 days. The people were terrified. They'd never seen anything like it. Moses had to wear a veil just so they could look at him without being overwhelmed. But underneath that veil, Moses was changed. He'd seen the pattern. He understood the timeline. He knew that everything was part of God's master plan. And that gave him a peace and confidence that would carry him through the next 40 years of leading a difficult, complaining, rebellious people through the wilderness. Because he knew the destination was certain. The promise was secure. And nothing, not Pharaoh's army, not the desert's challenges, not even the people's faithlessness, could stop what God had set in motion. The Book of Jubilees was treasured by the faithful for centuries. It was read alongside Genesis and Exodus, helping people understand the deeper meanings behind the stories they knew. But then something happened. Religious authorities began to feel threatened by it. Because if the timeline was already set, if the pattern was already established, if God had already prepared responses to every human failure, then what role did human religious power play? And so, slowly, the Book of Jubilees was marginalized, declared apocryphal, meaning not part of the official canon, removed from most Bibles, lost to most of the world. But it was never truly lost. In Ethiopia, the Orthodox Church preserved it as scripture. Monks copied it by hand generation after generation, protecting it from those who wanted it forgotten. And in the 20th century, when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, fragments of Jubilees were found among them, proving that the earliest Jewish communities considered it sacred, proving that it wasn't a medieval invention or a fringe text, but an ancient and honored book that had been deliberately suppressed. So why was it suppressed? That's what we need to talk about next. Chapter 10, The Forbidden Book, Why They Tried to Hide It. Let's be clear about something. The Book of Jubilees doesn't contradict the Bible. It expands it. It provides context, detail, and chronology that Genesis gives us in broad strokes. But that expansion was dangerous to certain people. Here's why. First, it made God too accessible. Throughout history, religious institutions have often acted as gatekeepers between God and ordinary people. You need us to interpret Scripture for you. You need us to tell you what God wants. You can't understand these things on your own. But Jubilees tells the story in such clear, chronological, accessible terms that anyone can understand it. It democratizes divine knowledge. And that threatened those who built their authority on being the exclusive interpreters of God's will. Second, it was too specific about timing. Jubilees gives exact dates for everything, measured in jubilees and years. It calculates when Noah was born, when the flood came, when Abraham received his call, everything. This specificity meant people could test it. They could study it. They could calculate for themselves when prophecies should be fulfilled. And that made religious leaders nervous. What if people started questioning why certain promises hadn't come to pass yet? What if they lost faith because the timeline didn't seem to match up? Better, they thought, to keep things vague. to let people trust that God works mysteriously and not look too closely at the details. Third, it dealt too explicitly with angels and spiritual warfare. Jubilees doesn't just mention angels in passing, it explains their roles, their ranks, their assignments. It talks about fallen angels in detail. It describes ongoing spiritual battles that humans are caught in the middle of. This made people uncomfortable. It raised questions about the nature of evil, about whether angels have free will, about how much influence spiritual beings have over human affairs. Questions that are easier to avoid than to answer. Fourth, it emphasized personal relationship with God over institutional religion. Notice that in all these stories, Noah, Abraham, Moses, God speaks directly to individuals, not through a priestly class, not through religious bureaucracy, directly, heart to heart. Jubilees reinforces this pattern throughout. It shows that God is looking for faith, not religious credentials, that He honors obedience from anyone, regardless of their status or education or family line. This message was revolutionary and threatening, because if people really believed they could hear from God themselves, what would they need religious authorities for? And fifth, perhaps most importantly, it prophesied too clearly about Jesus. Remember, the Book of Jubilees was written centuries before Jesus was born. Yet it describes a coming Redeemer who matches Jesus' life almost perfectly. For early Christians, this was wonderful confirmation that Jesus was indeed the promised one. But for religious leaders who rejected Jesus, it was a problem. If Jubilees predicted Him so clearly, how could they justify not accepting Him? Their solution? Claim Jubilees wasn't really ancient. Say it was written after Jesus by Christians trying to make their case. Discredit it. Remove it from the canon. Forget it existed. And for most of church history, that strategy worked. Most Christians never even heard of the Book of Jubilees. It became a footnote in academic discussions, not a living text that shaped people's faith. But here's the thing about truth. It doesn't stay buried forever. It has a way of resurfacing, of finding the people who need it, of speaking to new generations in new ways. And in our time, right now, when you're listening to this, the Book of Jubilees is experiencing a renaissance. People are discovering it, reading it, recognizing the wisdom and beauty in it, seeing how it complements and illuminates the Bible they already know. Why now? Maybe because we're living in a time when institutional authority is breaking down, when people are hungry for direct connection with God, when the questions Jubilees addresses about time, about purpose, about divine patterns in history are exactly the questions people are asking. Or maybe, if you believe in divine timing, it's resurfacing now because it's meant to, because the things it reveals are things we need to understand for the times we're living in. Either way, you now know about it. You've heard its stories. You've learned its secrets. And that knowledge changes you, even if you don't realize it yet. It gives you a longer view of history. It helps you see your life as part of a much bigger story. A story that started before you were born and will continue after you're gone, but which you play a meaningful role in right now. It reminds you that nothing is random, that the God who set the stars in motion and planned the cycles of time is also aware of you, of your struggles, of your questions, of your journey, and it invites you to trust Him the way Noah, Abraham, and Moses trusted Him. Not because everything makes sense, but because his character has proven trustworthy generation after generation after generation. If this exploration of a forbidden text has opened your eyes to new dimensions of faith, I'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment below telling me what surprised you most, what challenged you, what questions you still have. Let's learn from each other in the comments section. And now, let's talk about what all of this means for you personally, how these ancient stories connect to your life today, how the cycles of time that governed Noah's world are still turning in yours. Chapter 11. The Cycles of Time, Understanding Jubilees. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Book of Jubilees is its structure of time. Everything is measured in Jubilees, those 49-year periods we've mentioned. But what does that actually mean? And why should you care about ancient timekeeping methods? Here's why it matters. The Jubilee system reveals something profound about how God views time. In our modern world, we think of time as linear, a straight line from past to present to future. Things happen, we move on, and we can't go back. But the biblical view of time, especially as explained in Jubilees, is both linear and cyclical. Yes, history moves forward, but it also repeats certain patterns. The same lessons come around again and again until we learn them. Every 7 days, there's a Sabbath, a built-in rhythm of rest, a reminder that we're not machines designed for constant productivity. We're humans who need to pause, reflect, and remember our Creator. Every 7 years, ancient Israel was supposed to observe a Sabbath year. Let the land rest. Don't plant. Trust that God will provide. Release people from debts. Give everyone a fresh start. And every 7 times 7 years, 49 years, came the year of Jubilee. This was the ultimate reset button. All land that had been sold reverted to its original family. All slaves were set free. All debts were forgiven. Everyone got to start over. Can you imagine what that would be like? Every 50 years, the wealth gap closes. Every 50 years, nobody is trapped by their past mistakes. Every 50 years, hope is renewed because nothing is permanent except God's grace. The Jubilee system was a built-in protection against the accumulation of permanent injustice. It was God saying, I know humans will create systems that oppress and exploit, so I'm building in a reset that you can't avoid. But here's what the Book of Jubilees reveals. This isn't just an economic system. It's a reflection of how God views all of time. He's constantly providing opportunities for renewal, for redemption, for starting fresh. Your past doesn't have to define your future because God specializes in Jubilee moments, times when everything changes, when the old is forgiven and the new becomes possible. Think about the major stories we've covered tonight. Noah's flood was a Jubilee moment. Everything was washed clean. Humanity got to start over. Abraham's call was a Jubilee moment. God chose someone to begin a new covenant, a new relationship with humanity. Moses on Sinai was a Jubilee moment. God gave his law, established his pattern, set his people apart. And according to Jubilees, the coming of the Redeemer will be the ultimate Jubilee moment, the final reset, when all debts of sin are cancelled, all slaves to guilt are freed, and everyone who accepts it gets to start completely fresh. The reason religious authorities didn't like this message is obvious. It removes the power of guilt and shame as control mechanisms. If people really believed that God offers complete, fresh starts, not because we earned them, but because it's His nature to renew, they'd be much harder to manipulate. But that's exactly the message Jubilees proclaims. God is in the business of fresh starts, of new beginnings, of taking broken, guilty, shameful people and saying, "All right, that's behind you now. Let's start from here." This isn't the same as saying there are no consequences for our actions. There are. The natural results of our choices play out in our lives. But it is saying that God doesn't hold grudges. He doesn't keep a running tally of every failure so He can throw it in your face later. When He forgives completely. The slate is clean. The debt is cancelled. You're free. The Jubilee principle also means that no matter how bad things get, in your life, in your community, in the world, it's not permanent. Change is built into the system. Renewal is coming. Maybe not on your timeline, but on God's timeline, which the Book of Jubilees assures us is far more reliable. So when you're going through a hard season, when you feel stuck, when it seems like nothing will ever change, remember the Jubilee. Remember that God has built reset moments into the fabric of reality. He's not content to let injustice or suffering continue forever. Your Jubilee moment might be just around the corner. The moment when everything changes, when the burden lifts, when the door opens, when hope returns. And if you're waiting for that moment, know that your waiting isn't meaningless. Just like Noah building the ark for decades before the flood, your faithfulness during the waiting period is part of the story. It's building something. It's preparing you for what's coming. The Book of Jubilees teaches us to take the long view, to see our lives as part of a much bigger cycle, to trust that the God who planned creation in 7 days, who marked history in Jubilees, who knows the end from the beginning, that God has not forgotten you. Your story is part of His story. And in His story, redemption always wins. Love always prevails. Justice always comes, even if it takes longer than we'd like. So breathe, rest, trust. The same God who spoke to Moses on the mountain, who preserved Noah through the flood, who kept His promise to Abraham, that God is with you right now, in this moment, in this season of your life. And whether you feel it or not, His plan is unfolding exactly as it should. Chapter 12. The Promise Still Kept. What this means for you. We've journeyed together through thousands of years tonight, from before creation to the flood. From Abraham to Moses, from forbidden knowledge to timeless truth. But as we begin to close, I want to bring all of this back to you, right now, in your life, in your bed, in this quiet moment before sleep. What does any of this ancient history matter to you today? Here's what. Every story you've heard tonight is your story too. You are Adam and Eve, standing in a garden with a choice. Every day, you face decisions about whether to trust God's boundaries or reach for what looks good but isn't meant for you yet. You are Noah, called to build something that doesn't make sense while everyone around you mocks and doubts. Every time you obey God in the face of criticism, you're living Noah's story. You are Abraham, called to leave what's comfortable and walk toward a promise you can't yet see. Every step of faith you take into an uncertain future is part of Abraham's legacy. You are Moses, standing before a burning bush, hearing God call your name. Every moment when you sense God's voice asking you to do something difficult, that's your burning bush moment. The reason the Book of Jubilees was preserved, The reason these stories have survived for thousands of years is because they're not just history. They're mirrors. They show us ourselves. They reveal patterns we're still living out. And the core message of Jubilees, that God has a plan, that nothing is random, that divine love is pursuing humanity through every generation. That message is as relevant today as it was when the angel first spoke it to Moses. You are not an accident. You're not a random collection of atoms that happen to gain consciousness. You are a beloved child of the God who spoke the universe into existence. You are part of a story He's been telling since before time began. Your struggles matter. Your choices matter. Your faith, however small, however shaky, matters. The same God who preserved Noah through the flood wants to preserve you through whatever storm you're facing. The same God who called Abraham out of idolatry is calling you out of whatever false gods you've been trusting in. Money, success, popularity, control, calling you to trust Him instead. The same God who revealed the patterns of time to Moses wants to give you perspective on your own life, wants to show you that the hard season you're in isn't the end of the story. It's just one chapter, and He's already written the ending, and it's good. This is why I wanted to share the Book of Jubilees with you. Not just to give you interesting information, but to invite you into a bigger story, to help you see that your life has meaning because it's part of God's plan. You matter. Your generation matters. The choices you make today will ripple into eternity. Just like Noah's obedience still ripples through every rainbow, just like Abraham's faith still shapes world religions, just like Moses' encounter with God still teaches us about divine love. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, I want you to carry this truth with you. You are seen, you are known, you are loved by the God who created everything, who holds time in His hands, who has never broken a single promise. The Book of Jubilees ends with the people of Israel entering the Promised Land. After all the wandering, all the waiting, all the testing, they finally arrived. Not because they were perfect, but because God was faithful. Your Promised Land is waiting too. Maybe it's peace in your heart. Maybe it's restoration of a relationship. Maybe it's breakthrough in an area where you've struggled for years. Maybe it's simply the deep rest of knowing you're in God's hands. Whatever it is, it's coming. The same God who kept His promise to bring Israel out of Egypt will keep His promises to you. Sleep well, dear friend. Rest in the knowledge that the God who numbers every star knows your name. The God who set the cycles of time in motion is mindful of every moment of your life. You are part of the greatest story ever told. And your chapter, your unique, irreplaceable chapter, is important. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. If this journey through the Book of Jubilees has blessed you, please share it with someone who needs to hear these truths. And consider subscribing so you never miss future explorations of ancient wisdom and forgotten scripture. Until next time, may you rest in the arms of the God who has loved you since before the foundation of the world. May His peace guard your heart and mind. And may you wake tomorrow with fresh faith that He is still writing your story, and it's more beautiful than you can imagine. Good night, sleep well, and remember, nothing is ever truly lost when it's held in the hands of God. The same breath that spoke creation into existence is breathing life into you right now. You are loved, you are held, you are part of the eternal story of redemption. Rest now, rest.